Welcome to the Want to Know podcast. I'm Seth Engle.
I'm Zach Allen.
It's been quite the week for Penn State football. Some surprises here and there, some transfer additions, a major coaching change, is coming up. So we're going to discuss all that today. It's been a little while since we, even hopped on the pod, but I think this week was kind of the first big week of Penn State football news of the offseason. And to kick things off, I mean, Taylor Stubblefield, Penn State's wide receivers coach for the past couple of years, he's out of a job. Zach, what did you see there? And, what do you see for Penn State moving forward?
I mean, the wide receiver room as a whole has changed vastly over this past week, even just in the last hour. I mean, Jaden Dawson announced he's going in the transfer portal. So to have Taylor Stubblefield be relieved of his duties, as James Franklin's statement put, was kind of the cherry on top of it all. We haven't heard an official reason yet on why officially he was, relieved, but I feel like it has something to do with maybe recruiting. It hasn't been great by any means, and this past season, I know Parker Washington was hurt, but the leading receiver only had 600 yards, so maybe that had a factor into it. But we'll see later on in the season when James Franklin has the next press conference. I'm sure he'll clear some things up.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think it's interesting to mention the fact that, Stubblefield probably was struggling. There were areas in recruiting that weren't going as well as they've gone in the past. On-field concerns as well. You mentioned Parker Washington. Right now, when James Franklin isn't happy with one of his assistant coaches, Penn State has the ability to let them go and still, likely bring in a candidate that's, high profile and, maybe from a big program. But I think what was really interesting when you mentioned recruiting is that Penn State hadn't been able to bring in a transfer wide receiver yet in this cycle, even though that was just the glaring issue, the one big hole on the team. And then 1 hour after Stubblefield's fired, in comes Dante Cephas from Kent State, who, was arguably probably the top remaining transfer on the board. I've watched Dante's film. I know you have as well, Zach. What stands out, in Dante's game? I know he's a 6'1", 170-ish receiver. I think he could fit in real nice. What did you see from his film?
Yeah, I think Kent State's mascot is a perfect description of him. He is a flash when he gets out in space. He only played 9 games this season and still had 700 yards and a few touchdowns. But the season before that, he had over 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, 80 catches. He's a legitimate deep threat that I don't know if Penn State necessarily had last season. He's quick. He's not big by any means. But if you get him in space on a slant route, he can take it to the house, or he could just blow a defense top off and do it like that. So I think he's, like you said, he was the best transfer receiver left in the portal at that point. I think it's a huge pickup for Penn State's receiver room, which was really lacking depth up until this point. Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace were probably the 1 and 2 at that time. So I think it was just a beautiful pickup, and it was interesting that it happened not even an hour after Stubblefield.
I think it was within the hour. It was maybe, almost like 60 minutes on the dot. It was crazy.
Yeah, so he might have some intel on who the next receiver coach is going to be, because in my personal opinion, I don't know if a guy's going to transfer to another school when he doesn't know what he's getting into necessarily. So
that's the first thing I thought too, was, it was within the hour. I mean, Cephas had already made his mind up, but it's hard for me to believe that you transfer to a school, knowing that you're not going to have a receiver coach once you commit. It seems to me like they have a plan in place, and that was discussed to Cephas. And then also Malik McClain, who just announced his commitment on Wednesday, which was earlier today. two very different receivers. I mean, like you said about Cephas, he's not the most athletic guy. He is a great route runner. That's all he is. I mean, you don't want to compare him to Jahan Dotson, but that was a little bit of Jahan Dotson. He wasn't the fastest guy, wasn't the biggest. He just ran routes and got open. It's on that first step. That's where he beats his defensive back.
Mhm.
That's what Cephas does best. Malik McClain is a little different. I mean, this guy's 6'4", almost 6'5", 200 pounds. This is a deep threat. This guy to me reminds me a lot of Juwan Johnson when Penn State had him a couple years ago. Maybe if he puts on a little more pounds, use him kind of more of as a straight receiving tight end. But I mean, this guy's he's an athletic receiver. He's quick for his size. Didn't get a ton of touches at Florida State. I think he'll have a lot more at Penn State. They were lacking that big deep threat guy that you see. Mike Gesicki is a good example. Trace McSorley could just launch it up to him. Penn State hasn't had a guy like that. So I really like the fit with Malik McClain.
Yeah, I think that was a win for both parties. Florida State's wide receiver room was loaded, so he didn't get the touches he probably necessarily wanted, and Penn State's lacking depth. And to keep tooting his horn, he's a good run blocker, and we saw this year Penn State's run game was explosive and much improved from 2021. And to have those explosive runs, the wide receivers have to block downfield, and when you have a 6'4" guy who can, seal the edge on a cornerback, I think that's going to be very important for
100%.
Penn State next year.
Especially when you take into consideration the fact that Penn State didn't really have, that great of a run blocking wide receiver this year. They used Brenton Strange a lot as their kind of non-offensive line chip blocker. Brenton's gone now. They're going to need a new guy. I think Malik McClain's, he could kind of just fit right into that Brenton Strange role as, that lead receiving run blocker. You can pull him out too. I think it's a good fit for sure. Storm Duck is the other transfer they brought in from UNC. He was all ACC this year. A few days ago, it was looking like, okay, Penn State really failed in the transfer portal this year. Yeah, that's how it looked. And then they bring in these two receivers, Cephas and McClain, and all of a sudden that story is just flipped over completely. I mean, the receiving core looks good. It's hard to really pick, a positional group right now, with maybe the exception of interior D line that, is, you could see struggling. I mean, it's a pretty complete team right now.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think going back to Storm Duck, Joey Porter Jr. is obviously going to the draft, and Kalen King had a great year, but Storm Duck brings experience, accolades, and he adds to a defensive back group that was arguably the strong suit of Penn State's defense last season. And I'm excited to see him just more for his name, and his play on the field.
Storm Duck's the one guy I'm kind of upset that Penn State doesn't have names on the back of their jerseys. I know there's a whole controversy for that, but it would be so cool to see just Duck on the back of a jersey. That would do really well with NIL. But I mean, yeah, that defensive back room right now, Joey Porter Jr. is gone, and Penn State might have a better secondary than they did last year. Kalen King was arguably better than Joey Porter Jr., who's a potential top 10 pick right now. And then you got Johnny Dixon coming back, and then Storm Duck, Daquan Hardy's still there running the nickel. I mean, would you say it's Penn State's, best positional unit right now?
I mean, yeah, or linebacker, because Curtis Jacobs came back, Abdul Carter rose, like skyrocketed. But in terms of depth, I think it probably is up there with defensive end, because Kalen King was, I think, tied for first in the country in pass breakups. He had like 18 or something. I mean, when you look at safety, Keaton Ellis is coming back. So to replace Jair Brown.
T. Wheatley's still there as well.
Yeah, and Jalen Reed, and there's just enormous depth there. I think I don't really know if there's going to be any drop off without Joey Porter Jr. there. There certainly wasn't in the Rose Bowl. So yeah, I'm excited to see that group going forward.
Yeah. So I guess moving on, there really aren't too many questions on the roster the one question right now, which is pretty obvious, is this hole at wide receiver coach. We say, okay, well, they brought in these two guys. Maybe they know who they're bringing in. Have they discussed this with the receivers yet? There are a bunch of names flying out there, in-house guys, out-of-house guys who are coaches on teams, guys who are on the open market right now. There are a few people that jump off, the bat right away to me. And I think Bobby Engram is a big name there. I think Jeff Scott, who was just fired as South Florida's coach, is a big one. And then Josh Gaddis, who is Penn State's former wide receiver coach. Now he's currently offensive coordinator at Miami, struggled this year. People are calling for him to be fired. And then Chris Beatty, who's the wide receivers coach for the Chargers. There's a lot of staff turnover in LA right now. He could potentially be on the way out. So what do you see from these candidates? Who do you like the most? Who do you think it will be?
I mean, your article was really good in terms of candidates listed. I know you also said Calvin Lowry, who just came over from Tulsa, could also be up there because Tulsa had a great passing attack in 2022 as well. Another maybe dark horse guy could be Josh Crawford from Western Kentucky. I mean, this is maybe a little out there, but Mitchell Tinsley came over from there. Even though he's gone, they've had one of the best passing attacks in the last couple years. They've had the leading passer in back-to-back years, and part of that is, the wide receivers getting open. So I could see him coming over, and like you said, Chris Beatty, I think, would be the best of the best. Just having NFL experience on the coaching staff, I think that would stand out to recruits. I think that would allow him to teach the receivers currently on the roster too. So I think that would probably be like the best one, but it's also the biggest, I think, what if, because no one knows what's going to go on with the Chargers coaching staff after this. So he could still stay there. I also liked Jeff Scott that you wrote about. He was just fired from South Florida, but he was a great wide receiver coach with Clemson. I mean, that wide receiver group for a while was one of the nation's best. And I think he would also be a great hire. And that one is really, really, really realistic. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think Penn State's at the point right now where they don't have to dig for, someone at a small school, maybe like Western Kentucky, even though that's a candidate that, could potentially use that as a step up. Penn State could dig for, kind of similar to what they did with Manny Diaz, where they got the head coach of Miami to be their defensive coordinator. That worked out really well. I mean, Jeff Scott's a guy to me that is kind of similar in a way to Manny Diaz. I mean, maybe he'll just be an offensive coordinator instead, but he's on the open market right now, so it's possible. They'd probably have to put him in some type of associate role. But I mean, there's some guys here that really stand out to me. You mentioned having a great passing attack like Western Kentucky. I think Jamarcus Shepard, who's currently the receivers coach at Washington, is another name to keep in mind. He was at Purdue when Purdue would not run the football at all, similar to Western Kentucky does. They throw it all the time. He recruited and coached, receivers like David Bell and Rondell Moore, now obviously in the NFL. But they have a lot of options. To me at this point, it's saying, well, we didn't know Taylor Stubblefield was going to be fired, but now that he is gone, now we're looking kind of at this whole list of these high profile replacements for him. And we're saying, all right, well, maybe this was the right move. I mean, Bobby Engram's a former player and he was just offensive coordinator at Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's already more coordinating experience than Stubblefield ever had. He's also a longtime NFL player and, went to Penn State. It's a good fit.
Yeah. I mean, wide receiver coach is probably not the end goal for a lot of these guys, but Penn State is like the tip of the iceberg in terms of getting noticed with your coaching. I know, like you said, Manny Diaz, he went from head coach down to defensive coordinator. Now he had a great year, and he's probably on a lot of people's lists for their head coaching jobs in the future. So I think there are a lot of good guys out there, like you said, that just don't have to be wide receiver coaches and maybe take a step down for a year or two, uh, you know, get their groove back at their position coaches and then go back out there as offensive coordinators or wide receiver coaches at maybe the pro level, like Chris Beatty. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's about it for us. I think we covered a lot here. There's probably going to be more to come, in the coming days, weeks, months. I mean, I guess winter workouts are less than a month away at this point. So, things are heating up. Football's coming back, even though it feels like it just ended. But yeah, we have a lot, and we'll keep you guys covered every week. So thank you for tuning into the 1-0 Pod. I'm Seth. This is
I'm
Zach.
Zach.
Yeah, follow along at PSU Footblog for all our coverage and at collegian.psu.edu.